He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the most skilled, and he definitely wasn't the prettiest player to watch. In fact, plenty of critics dismissed him outright, branding him nothing more than a thug in a rugby shirt. But here's the twist. Week after week he left opponents second-guessing themselves, and teammates glad he was on their side. What turned a man mocked for his lack of finesse into one of the most terrifying figures rugby has ever seen? The answer is a story you won't forget. Eben's impact goes far beyond the set piece. His presence in the loose is what makes him such a complete lock. He has that uncanny sense of timing when to smash into a ruck, when to hold back, when to step in as the extra link in the chain. Coaches trust him because he brings both muscle and intelligence, and teammates feed off that certainty. Opposition players will tell you the same thing. When he's in the pack, the entire energy of the game shifts. The accolades, the caps, the World Cup medals, all of these mark milestones, but they are secondary to the narrative of transformation. Eben's legacy isn't written in awards alone, it's etched into the psyche of the game itself. Off the field, Eben's story continues to resonate. His choices, from passing up lucrative contracts to return home, to playing for his father's memory, to mentoring younger players, reflect a man whose influence extends far beyond the pitch. The decision to prioritize family over fortune in 2022 illuminated a facet of his character that few critics anticipated. A depth of loyalty, humility, and understanding that anchors the man behind the muscle. Every performance following such life events carried an extra weight, a deliberate intentionality. Watching him play in those moments, one could see a man not simply executing a sport, but performing a kind of devotion, a ritualized dedication to people and principles that shaped him. Is it the tackles that stopped scoring chances? The lineouts he won against the odds? The matches he turned with a single decisive play? Or is it something less tangible, a sense of inevitability and authority that he brings wherever he steps onto the field? For the younger generation watching, Eben becomes more than a player. He becomes a benchmark, a standard of what it means to combine size, skill, and mind in a way that is utterly unique. His influence ripples through youth teams, through aspiring athletes, and even through those who oppose him on match day. In a way, the mythos of Eben is self-perpetuating. The more the game grows, the more his name appears as a point of reference, a template of excellence mixed with intimidation, discipline, and heart. His relationship with adversity is particularly instructive. Injuries that might have ended careers for others were reframed as opportunities, moments to test endurance and commitment. The rigorous physical toll he endures is only one side of the coin. The psychological demands, the constant scrutiny, the expectation to lead and perform, add layers of complexity, and yet Eben navigates these pressures with a calculated steadiness. It's an intelligence that exists alongside brute force, a duality few players manage to master. Even as a veteran of the game, Eben continues to redefine what it means to be a modern lock. Young players entering professional rugby see in him a template of versatility, a man capable of both extraordinary physical domination and strategic thinking. He illustrates that power alone is not enough. Insight, awareness, and adaptability are equally critical, and it's in this combination that his legend solidifies. Opponents may fear the tackle, but they respect the awareness. In essence, Eben's influence stretches across every aspect of play, shaping how forwards are trained, how lineouts are contested, and how matches are approached at the highest level. What makes him fascinating is how his career has balanced longevity with evolution. He didn't just stay the same bruising youngster who burst onto the scene. He added leadership, refined his technique, and adapted his body to keep pace with modern rugby's relentless demands. That's why, even after all these years at the top, he's still spoken about as one of the most influential locks of his generation. For South Africa, he's more than just a player. He's a standard of what it means to be unrelenting, reliable, and vital in the moments that matter. When the dust of Paris settled in 2023, South Africa had won back-to-back World Cups, and Eben Etzebeth's name wasn't just etched into rugby history, it was carved in bold. For most players, 2 Webb Ellis Cups would be the career-defining milestone. For him, it felt like just one chapter in a larger story, a story still being written. That's because Etzebeth wasn't simply collecting medals, he was rewriting what it meant to be a lock in the modern era. Traditionally, second rows were defined by brute force in the scrum and vertical dominance in the line-out. Their names rarely made it into highlight packages. But Etzebeth shifted that equation. He blurred the boundaries of what a lock could be. He could dominate the aerial game, yes, but he could also carry like a back row forward, defend like a center in open field, and read the breakdown like a seasoned flanker. Analysts often pointed out how his background as a back in school gave him a toolkit most locks never develop. Add in his towering 2.03 men and frame and 20 kg engine, and you had something close to rugby's version of a Swiss Army knife. And the longer his career went, the more obvious it became that South Africa built entire game plans around him. His influence wasn't limited to physical attributes. The role he played as a leader was becoming impossible to overlook. By 2017, Etzebeth was already captaining the Springboks in tests. That responsibility thrust upon him while still relatively young in international terms could have exposed cracks. Instead, it revealed resilience. He wasn't the kind of captain who needed grand speeches to win a room. His authority came from how he carried himself in every match situation. If he said something in a huddle, teammates knew it was because he had lived it, fought through it, and would continue to do so alongside them. The controversies were real, though. Off the field, Etzebeth has occasionally found himself in headlines for the wrong reasons, including accusations of misconduct in 2019 that led to legal disputes. These cases stirred debate, but within rugby, the focus often returned to what he represented between the touchlines. By 2022 and 2023, his leadership and performances had overwhelmed the noise. He was voted South Africa's Player of the Year 2 seasons in a row, joining a select few who had managed back-to-back recognition. That's not sentimental voting, it's peers and coaches acknowledging that for all the stars in the Springboks squad, Etzebeth was their most indispensable presence. What's striking about his story is how the narrative kept evolving. He began as the enforcer, the intimidator. Then he became the survivor, battling through injuries and setbacks. Later, he was the leader, the compass teammates leaned on. And finally, in 2023, he emerged as the son paying tribute, embodying both vulnerability and strength in the most human way. That arc explains why his legacy has a depth beyond statistics. But the numbers do deserve their spotlight. By 2024, he had surpassed Victor Matfield's long-standing record to become the most capped Springbok of all time, with 34 test appearances. That's not just a number, it's a symbol of trust. Coaches across multiple regimes, through different tactical eras, kept writing his name onto the team sheet. Think about what that requires: fitness, adaptability, discipline, and most of all, consistency. The Springboks have always had depth in the lock position. Yet year after year, Etzebeth remained the first-choice option. Records in rugby aren't just broken by talent, they're broken by durability and hunger. He had both. So if you strip away the medals and numbers, what you're left with is his cultural imprint. In South Africa, rugby is more than sport. It's a story of identity, pride, and struggle. Etzebeth fits into that narrative as both a throwback and a modernizer. He carries the old-school toughness of second rows from decades past, the ones who built reputations in scrums and mauls. But he also represents the new generation, mobile, skilled, capable of playing across the park. His presence connects eras, which is why fans from different generations can claim him as their lock. He was in the conversation as one of the greatest locks in world rugby history, period. Comparisons with Martin Johnson, Brodie Retallick, and John Eales became unavoidable. Different eras, different contexts, but the thread connecting them is influenced players who made teams believe differently simply by being present. And then, of course, there is the human side. The image of him kneeling after the 2023 final, pointing to the sky, is already iconic. For all the stereotypes that followed him in his early years, that single moment shattered them. This wasn't a villain or a brute. It was a man who had just won everything rugby could offer. Yet all he wanted was a private conversation with his father. That's why his story resonates far beyond rugby circles. It's not just about lineouts and tackles. It's about loyalty, resilience, and how people carry their roots with them no matter how high they climb. Looking ahead, the question becomes legacy. He's still playing, still adding caps, still shaping games. But even if he retired tomorrow, his influence would echo for decades. Younger locks in South Africa now grow up, modeling not just the physical standards he set, but the versatility he embodied. Coaches point to his career as a template, proof that size plus mobility plus intelligence can coexist in one player. That's the blueprint he leaves behind. But perhaps the most telling detail is how opponents talk about him. Rival players, when interviewed, often say the same thing. You know where he is every minute of the game. That might be the purest compliment a lock can receive. It means you can't ignore him. It means his presence changes the way you play. That is legacy in its rawest sporting form. In over 100 test matches for South Africa, Etzebeth has never been shown a red card. He walked the tightrope everyone swore he couldn't. And he didn't just survive there. He built a career that made him the most capped Springbok in history and a two-time World Cup winner. The contradiction is the point. The so-called enforcer became the example of endurance, discipline, and leadership. And the roots of that journey lie in a working-class town outside Cape Town, where toughness wasn't a slogan, it was currency. Power doesn't sell you a dream, it sells you reality. Modest homes, narrow streets, industry on the doorstep. In a community like that, nobody writes headlines about you. You earn respect by how you stand up when it's uncomfortable. That's the soil Eben Etzebeth grew in. His father Harry was already known as a man you didn't test lightly, a champion wrestler whose reputation was stitched into the neighborhood stories. What really defined him was that deeper inheritance, the rule that said you never take a step backward. But destiny doesn't always come in a straight line. As a boy, Eben didn't look like the prototype lock. He ran with the backs, played wide, looked more like a kid built for space than for scrums. His surname carried weight, but his frame hadn't caught up to it. Then, almost overnight, it did. Between 10th and 11th grade, Etzebeth had a growth spurt so dramatic it rewrote his position. Suddenly the backline runner was a towering frame, barely squeezing through doorways, the kind of physique you can't ignore on a rugby field. Coaches moved him into the forwards, and it felt like destiny had finally remembered his address. But here's the twist. Those years spent as a backline player weren't wasted. They gave him awareness, agility, and decision-making that traditional locks often lack. Now he had the size to dominate collisions, but also the instincts to read space like a back. A rare hybrid was forming, mobility with muscle, brains with brute force. That cocktail would become his trademark, and it would fast-track him to levels of the game that most teenagers never even dream about. And then something even rarer happened. He became a Springbok regular almost faster than he became a Stormers regular. South Africa prioritized him, fast-tracked him, threw him into the test cauldron. He was already shortlisted for World Rugby Player of the Year. That nomination wasn't a pat on the back. It was validation that the impact wasn't just local pride. It was global recognition. Opponents began to adjust their game plans around him. Teams knew that if Etzebeth was on the field, lineouts wouldn't be simple, rucks wouldn't be uncontested, and carries into contact would feel heavier. That's how quickly he reshaped the fear factor on South African rugby. One season in, and he was already being described as a force of nature. But rugby doesn't let anyone rise without cost. The style that made him feared was also the style that put his body on a collision course with breakdown. Doctors began sounding warnings. The way he threw himself into contact zones, the sheer frequency of collisions, the torque on his frame, it wasn't sustainable. Injuries came and people thought that maybe his time was up, maybe the gamble had caught up with him. But here's where you see the man behind the headlines. For Etzebeth, a comeback wasn't a medical recovery. It was an act of defiance. Every time he walked back onto a field after being sidelined, he was sending a message he wasn't done. In those moments, the label of enforcer softened into something more enduring. Survivor, and eventually leader. Leadership doesn't always arrive with speeches. In his case, it was built from a quieter authority. Teammates would say he wasn't the loudest voice in the dressing room, but when he did speak, people listened, because they knew the sacrifice behind his words. He had bled for the jersey, fought through the pain barrier, chosen commitment over comfort. That gives weight to every sentence you say in a huddle. Over time, the perception shifted. Etzebeth wasn't just a bruiser, he was a compass. And the truest proof of that came in the choices he made off the field. The rugby economy in Europe dangles massive contracts in front of Southern Hemisphere players. Many take the offer, it's hard to say no. But in 2022, Etzebeth made the opposite call. After a stint in France, he returned to South Africa, signing for the Sharks. On paper, it looked like he'd turned down fortunes. In reality, it was about family, the pull of home, of connection, of choosing proximity to his roots over the lure of a bigger paycheck. In a career already loaded with achievements, that decision showed something deeper. His strength wasn't only in what he could deliver on a field, but in what he chose to protect off it. For fans, that cemented his reputation not just as a player to admire, but as a man to respect.